Hey everyone. Tonight we begin not with bullets, but with a needle pressed against trembling skin. Imagine a soldier, lying in the mud, his chest torn open. A medic bends close, and morphine hisses into his veins like a lullaby. Pain dissolves. His eyes glaze over, and for a moment, the war feels distant. But that relief carries a profound price. From the Civil War's soldiers' disease to the jungles of Vietnam, America's armies marched not just with rifles and rations, but with opium, morphine, and heroin stitched into their very survival. These drugs dulled agony, erased fear, even made death easier to deliver. Yet, when the guns fell silent, the cravings remained, chasing men into hospitals, prisons, and city streets back home. If forgotten weapons of history intrigue you, like and subscribe. And tell me what's one hidden truth about war you think most people ignore. Now, steady your breath and follow me into the shadows of addiction at war. You are there, in the scorching summer of 1863. The air is thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Under the vast, indifferent sky of Gettysburg, around you, the landscape is a grim tapestry of suffering, woven with the groans of the fallen and the distant, thunderous percussion of cannons that still shake the very ground beneath your broken body. You lie sprawled in the churned earth, every breath a shallow, trembling effort, your chest a searing inferno from a wound that feels too deep to ever heal. The agony is a relentless, physical presence, a monstrous claw digging into your very being, demanding your attention, consuming your thoughts, drowning out even the chaos of battle. Then, a shadow falls over you, a face, grimed with dust and sweat, belonging to an army surgeon, looms above. His eyes, though weary, hold a flicker of something akin to hope, or perhaps simply a desperate practicality. In his hand, he holds a slender glass syringe filled with a clear, golden liquid, morphine. It is a new miracle, they say, a blessed balm in this unholy crucible of war. You watch, numb with pain and exhaustion, as the needle, sharp and precise, pierces your trembling skin, a faint hiss, a whisper of release, as the drug flows into your veins. The world, which moments ago was a symphony of torment, begins to soften, to blur at the edges. You feel a warmth, slow and insidious, spreading from the point of injection, gently extinguishing the fire in your chest. The monstrous claw recedes, its grip loosening, its sharp edges dulling. The groans around you become distant murmurs, the cannon fire, a muffled drumming far away. A profound, almost spiritual peace begins to settle over you, a quiet stillness you haven't known since before the war began. It is a blissful oblivion, a surrender to something greater than pain, greater than fear, greater even than the crushing weight of the battle. You drift, floating on a sea of calm, the world fading to a gentle hum. This quiet, desperate relief was shared by hundreds of thousands, a silent, unseen tide flowing through the Union and Confederate camps. For many, like you, the drug did what nothing else could. It quieted the screaming agony, allowing wounds to be tended, allowing a moment of rest. But this potent balm, this miraculous invention, carried with it a hidden, insidious cost. As the war eventually faded, leaving its scars on the land and in the souls of men, a new kind of wound began to manifest. Over 400,000 veterans, silent casualties of a different kind of war, found themselves shackled by what came to be known as soldier's disease, a relentless, haunting dependence on morphine. A field doctor, witnessing this silent epidemic unfold, would later write with a heavy heart. The drug saved their lives, but after the war, it shackled them forever. The peace it offered on the battlefield became a prison in the quiet towns back home, a constant whisper of craving that echoed long after the last shot was fired. Decades later, the world plunged into another maelstrom. You find yourself in the sodden, claustrophobic labyrinth of the trenches in World War I. The air here is a perpetually cold, damp shroud, heavy with the stench of mud, decaying sandbags, and the metallic scent of distant cordite. Rain is a constant companion, turning the earth into a clinging, sucking morass that pulls at your boots with every weary step. The walls of the trench are an oppressive embrace, offering little comfort, only a fleeting sense of dubious safety. Above, the sky is often a bruised, gray expanse, punctuated by the whistle of shells and the stuttering cough of machine guns. In this landscape of endless dread, where every moment is a gamble with death, morphine remains a familiar, if grimmer, companion. You watch as a medic, his face a mask of grim determination, kneels beside a man whose leg has been all but severed by shrapnel. The wounded soldier's face is a pale mask, his teeth gritted against a pain that threatens to consume him whole. The medic, with practiced hands, prepares the syringe. But before he administers the dose, you notice a small pot of black ointment near his kit. After the injection, with the soldier's features slackening into a fragile, pain-free repose, the medic reaches out, his finger tracing a stark, black cross on the man's forehead. It is a grim, necessary ritual, a silent warning etched onto the skin, signifying that morphine has been given, a desperate measure to prevent accidental overdose in the chaos. The war's barbarity pushes the limits of human endurance, and with it, the limits of what medicine can do. You hear hushed whispers of the Battle of Opium Ridge in 1915, a particularly brutal engagement where the mud swallowed men whole and artillery carved grotesque new forms from the living. There, in the dim light of a makeshift aid station, you envision a soldier, barely recognizable as human, his face a ruin where eyes, nose, and jaw once were. His agony is beyond comprehension, a living scream trapped in a shattered form. The decision is made. A horrific mercy, 4 lethal injections of morphine, administered one after another, to finally bring an end to a suffering that war itself could no longer contain. But it wasn't just morphine that seeped into the fabric of trench life. You begin to see your comrades, their faces gaunt with hunger and fatigue, chewing on small, dark tablets. These are forced march tablets, or the even more common Burroughs Welcome tabloids cocaine, designed to dull the gnawing emptiness in the stomach and lend a false energy to exhausted limbs. You witness pilots, both German and French, their eyes unnaturally wide, their movements sharp and jerky, as they speak of using cocaine to cut through the freezing, thin air at altitude, to stay awake through endless, harrowing reconnaissance flights. The desire to simply keep going, to push through the exhaustion, becomes a powerful, almost primal urge. The sheer, chilling normalcy of it all is perhaps the most unsettling aspect. You recall seeing advertisements in a battered, crumpled newspaper from London, hawking trench gift kits from the prestigious Harrods department store. These weren't just tins of biscuits or woolen socks. They contained a vial of morphine, a small packet of cocaine, and a gleaming syringe, all wrapped up as a thoughtful present to send to your loved one at the front. The war, in its cruel ingenuity, had found a way to normalize the very tools of addiction, transforming them into symbols of care, silently inviting the soldier, and perhaps even the civilian back home, into a world where solace came in a tiny, bitter pill or a quiet injection. As the echoes of the Great War gradually fade, you step into a quieter, yet no less profound, landscape. The America of the interwar years. The brutal, explicit presence of drugs on the battlefield has receded. But you find, with a subtle shift in perspective, that opium, in its various forms, has quietly permeated the very fabric of daily life. It isn't hidden away in dark corners or whispered about in hushed tones. Rather, it sits openly, almost casually, on the shelves of your local pharmacy. You walk past a drugstore window, and there, neatly arranged, you see rows upon rows of small, dark glass bottles, each labeled laudanum. This isn't some exotic, foreign substance. It's a familiar, household remedy, a potent blend of opium dissolved in alcohol. It's marketed as a cure for everything from a nagging cough to a restless night. You might even find a bottle in your own medicine cabinet, tucked away alongside liniments and tonics. The air around these places holds a faint, sweet, and somewhat cloying scent, a subtle hint of the drug's widespread presence. And then, you notice the advertisements, some in newspapers, others on brightly colored tins. They depict smiling mothers, serene babies, and robust men, all seemingly benefiting from these elixirs. You learn that children, fussing and crying, are often given Godfrey's cordial, affectionately called mother's friend. You imagine a mother, weary from a long day, gently administering a spoonful of this dark, syrupy mixture opium mixed with honey to quiet a teething infant or soothe a restless child. The sweet taste, the calming effect, a temporary reprieve for both parent and child, creating a subtle, almost innocent pathway to early exposure. For women, the gentle sway of laudanum is often sought to ease the intense discomfort of menstrual pain, to quiet the tumultuous whispers of depression, or to calm the nervous tremors associated with the vague, often misdiagnosed condition of hysteria. You can almost picture a woman, her brow furrowed with worry or her body racked with pain, taking a small, measured dose, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders, the world softening around her edges, just as it had for the soldiers decades before. It offers a fleeting moment of peace in a world that often afforded them little control over their own suffering. The reach of opium extends even into the hallowed halls of literature and art. You discover that revered figures, voices that shaped the very consciousness of the age, were also users. Coleridge, with his wild, dreamlike verse, Byron, whose passionate poetry captivated a generation, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, whose eloquent words spoke of profound love and quiet suffering, all found solace, or perhaps inspiration, in the gentle, hypnotic embrace of opium. Their experiences hint at a deeper, more complex relationship with the drug, not merely as a medicine, but as a muse, a gateway to altered perceptions. The first faint stirrings of control begin to emerge with the Harrison Act in 1914, a landmark piece of legislation that attempted to regulate the sale and distribution of narcotics. Yet, despite this burgeoning awareness, the tide of opium was too vast, too deeply ingrained in society, to be easily turned back. You still see old advertisements, their faded ink praising morphine not as a last resort, but as a revival tonic, a restorative elixir, promising to bring vitality and vigor. It is a strange, unsettling paradox. The very substance that had shackled a generation of soldiers after the Civil War was now being openly promoted as a pathway to health and well-being for the civilian population. The nation, it seems, had quietly, almost unconsciously, become accustomed to swimming in the gentle, pervasive currents of opium. The tranquility of the interwar years shatters with the thunderous roar of World War II. And once again, you find yourself amidst the grim machinery of global conflict. This war, unlike the grinding stalemate of the trenches, is a war of rapid movement, of lightning-fast assaults, and the relentless demand for endurance. The medical response, too, has evolved, becoming more efficient, more immediate. The familiar glass syringe of previous wars is largely replaced by a compact, ingenious device, the syringe. You are equipped with it yourself. Tucked neatly into the breast pocket of your uniform, a set of small, yellow tubes, each sealed and ready. These are morphine syringes, disposable, single-dose units, now a standard component of every GI first aid pouch. The simplicity is striking twist, plunge, and the precious painkiller is delivered. It speaks to a new era of combat where quick action, even in medical aid, is paramount. You envision the chaos of D-Day. June 6, 1944, as paratroopers plunge into the pre-dawn darkness over Normandy. Each man, a tiny speck against the vast sky, carries not just his rifle and pack, but also these bright yellow syringes, a silent promise of relief against the inevitable pain of combat. A small comfort in the terrifying descent. But World War II introduces another powerful chemical ally to the soldier's arsenal. One focused not on dulling pain, but on sharpening performance amphetamines, specifically benzedrine. These aren't about soothing agony. They're about pushing the boundaries of human endurance. You hear tales of pilots, their eyes wide and unblinking, flying through endless nights, their hands steady on the controls. One U.S. pilot, his voice a low, almost reverent murmur, speaks of the experience one benzedrine, and I felt I could fly through the night without fear. You can almost feel that surge of artificial energy, the temporary suppression of fatigue, the illusion of limitless capability. For infantrymen, locked in continuous combat for days without rest, benzedrine offers the grim illusion of an inexhaustible strength, allowing them to push onward, bypassing the body's desperate cries for sleep. You recognize the profound shift taking place. This isn't just about managing pain anymore. It's about managing the human machine itself. The war becomes a proving ground for what some would call the chemical warfare of the mind. The substances are no longer simply a last resort for the wounded, but a tool for the able-bodied, a way to manipulate vigilance, to overcome the most fundamental human needs for rest and recovery. The drugs become a part of the strategy, a silent, invisible weapon wielded to extend the limits of combat, to keep the engines of war running without pause. The question slowly begins to emerge: at what cost this relentless push? This defiance of nature? This constant, chemically induced state of readiness? As the global conflict of World War II subsides, the world is not granted a true peace. Instead, you find yourself drawn into another brutal, often forgotten, conflict: the Korean War, stretching from 1950 to 1953. This war, fought in the bitter cold and unforgiving terrain of the Korean Peninsula, serves as a silent, yet crucial, bridge between the chemical practices of past wars and the torrent that would come later. Here, the familiar shadows of morphine, codeine, and barbiturates remain constant companions in the field hospitals, standard tools in the grim repertoire of pain management. You stand on the Pusan perimeter. The air is thin and biting, carrying with it the distant echoes of small arms fire and the pervasive chill of a landscape stripped bare by conflict. The medical tent is a stark contrast to the vast, open brutality outside. Inside, it's a dimly lit, claustrophobic space, warmed only by the faint glow of lanterns and the close proximity of suffering men. The smell of antiseptic, blood, and sweat hangs heavy. Doctors move with a quiet, practiced urgency, their faces etched with exhaustion, their breath misting in the cold air. You watch as a medic leans over a soldier, his face contorted with agony, his uniform shredded to reveal a burning, raw wound from the desperate battles along the Chongchon River. The soldier's breath comes in ragged gasps, his body trembling uncontrollably. With a steady hand, the medic prepares a syringe, the familiar ritual of relief unfolding before your eyes. The morphine flows, and you observe the subtle but profound transformation, the tension slowly draining from the soldier's features, the rigid lines of pain softening, his eyes glazing over as a fragile peace takes hold. It is a moment of profound, if temporary, surrender to the drug's power, a small island of calm in a sea of torment. Despite the relative quiet surrounding drug use compared to the previous great wars, you sense that the pattern of dependence remains, a quiet, almost imperceptible undertow. The stories of addiction, though not as loudly proclaimed as soldiers' disease, echo the same desperate narrative. Men, after enduring the freezing cold, the relentless fighting, and the profound trauma of this brutal war, would carry their dependence back home. The silent comfort found in the field hospital often transmuted into a quiet struggle in the post-war years. Another invisible wound carried by veterans. The Korean War, in many ways, was a prelude, a quiet, yet intense, period where the stage was set for the explosive, far more visible, drug crisis that would define the next major conflict. The lessons of managing pain and maintaining function with drugs were reinforced. The reliance on them deepened. Even if the scale of visible addiction seemed smaller, it was a bridge of quiet suffering, leading inevitably to the gathering storm of Vietnam, where the use of drugs would become not just a coping mechanism, but a defining characteristic of a generation at war. The landscape shifts dramatically now, and you are plunged into the suffocating humidity and emerald green density of the Vietnam jungle between 1965 and 1968. The air here is thick, clinging to your skin like a second uniform, alive with the buzzing of unseen insects and the omnipresent scent of wet earth, dense foliage, and the distant, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of Huey helicopter rotors. The psychological toll of this war, fought without clear lines, against an often unseen enemy, in an environment that is itself a constant adversary, begins to press down on you. In the midst of this relentless tension, a different kind of solace emerges, one not typically found in a medic's kit. You observe a group of GIs, their faces streaked with sweat and fatigue, hunkered down in a quiet moment, perhaps during a brief respite or while waiting for extraction. A small, hand-rolled cigarette, its tip glowing faintly, passes from hand to hand. This isn't tobacco. This is marijuana. The scent, sweet and pungent, mixes incongruously with the earthy smell of the jungle and the distant, familiar tang of helicopter fuel. It is a shared ritual, a moment of fleeting escape, a collective sigh in the oppressive heat. You learn, later, that a staggering 30% of U.S. troops tried smoking marijuana at least once in this environment. It was a way to blur the edges of the harsh reality, to slow down the relentless pace of fear, to find a moment of peace, however illicit. The reality of this widespread drug use among American troops begins to seep out, eventually reaching the public back home. In 1968, a young journalist, John Steinbeck IV, the son of the famed novelist, publishes a scathing expose. His reports, stark and unflinching, shock America. He describes GIs smoking openly, the drug culture becoming an undeniable, visible part of military life in Vietnam. The comfortable illusion of disciplined, clean-cut soldiers begins to crack, replaced by a more complex, uncomfortable truth. The military, reeling from the public outcry and the perceived erosion of discipline, reacts with a swift, heavy hand. You witness massive eradication efforts, fields of marijuana plants, stretching as far as the eye can see, are set ablaze or torn from the earth, over 500,000 plants destroyed in a desperate attempt to stem the tide. Arrests skyrocket, with over 1,000 soldiers apprehended each week for drug-related offenses. The crackdown is fierce, punitive, and seemingly relentless. But you observe a bitter, unintended consequence of this repression. By making marijuana harder to obtain and more dangerous to use, the military inadvertently cleared a path for something far more insidious, far more destructive. The demand for escape, for a way to cope with the relentless pressure, did not disappear. It merely shifted. As marijuana became riskier, a new, more potent, and more easily concealed drug began to fill the void, silently preparing to consume a generation. The jungle, already a place of danger, was about to offer an even more treacherous path. As the calendar turns to the late 1960s and early 1970s, the humid air of Vietnam grows even heavier, not just with the scent of the jungle, but with a new, insidious presence: heroin. This isn't the crude, often unrefined drug of the American streets. This is China White, a heroin of astonishing purity, virtually odorless and incredibly easy to conceal. Its discreet nature makes it frighteningly accessible. A small, almost invisible ghost that can be tucked into the filter of a cigarette or snorted as a fine powder. You witness its pervasive spread, tracing its origins to the infamous Golden Triangle, a sprawling, lawless region encompassing parts of Laos, Burma, and Thailand. From this vast poppy-growing heartland, the high-purity heroin flows like an unstoppable river, traversing the porous borders of Cambodia, infiltrating American bases with chilling ease. It's an open secret, an undeniable part of the landscape. You see it everywhere, in subtle gestures, in the way a man might drift off, or the unusual calm in a place of chaos. The statistics, when they eventually emerge, are staggering. By 1973, the year of the U.S. withdrawal, an alarming 20% of all U.S. soldiers in Vietnam are regular heroin addicts, and an even larger, more chilling number, 450,000 men, have tried the drug at least once. It's a silent epidemic, spreading through the ranks with the speed and efficiency of a jungle vine. You hear the stark, unforgettable testimony of a GI, his voice flat with a weary resignation. In Vietnam, heroin was cheaper than a can of Coke. This simple statement speaks volumes. It wasn't a luxury or a desperate last resort. It was a commonplace commodity, more accessible and more affordable than a cold drink in the oppressive heat. This ease of access, combined with the crushing psychological burden of the war, the arbitrary violence, the constant fear, the moral ambiguities created a perfect, terrible storm. You can almost taste the humid air, heavy with the metallic scent of gunpowder, as you envision soldiers crouching in sandbag bunkers, the dim light of a Zippo lighter flickering. They are not lighting ordinary cigarettes. With practiced nonchalance, they lace their tobacco with the fine, white powder of heroin. The smoke curls upwards, mixing with the ever-present haze of combat, a thin, blue-gray ribbon intertwining with the humid air. For a fleeting moment, the roar of the war fades, replaced by a warm, encompassing numbness. The fear dissipates, replaced by a tranquil detachment. The anxieties of jungle patrol, the terror of unseen enemies, the despair of endless conflict all recede into a soft, hazy distance. But beneath this ephemeral peace lies a potent, growing darkness, a silent chain being forged, ready to follow these men home long after the guns fall silent. The war was destroying bodies and minds, and heroin was becoming the ultimate, yet most treacherous, anodyne. The long, arduous war in Vietnam finally draws to a close, and a new, unprecedented challenge emerges: how to bring home a generation of soldiers, many of whom are grappling with a profound, often hidden, heroin addiction. The year is 1971, and President Nixon, in the throes of his war on drugs, implements a radical, sweeping program designed to address this crisis before it touches American soil. It is known as Operation Golden Flow. You imagine the scene at the departure airfields in Vietnam, a strange, almost surreal transition point between the chaos of war and the hope of home. Soldiers, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Line up, not just for their flight, but for a mandatory ritual, before they can board the transport planes that will carry them back across the Pacific. Each man is required to urinate for a drug test. The atmosphere is tense, a stark contrast to the casual drug use that permeated the jungles just days before. The stakes are clear: fail the test, and your journey home is delayed, redirected to a military detoxification unit. This program, born of a desperate need to prevent a full-blown heroin epidemic from flooding the nation, yields a surprising and profound insight. The results are nothing short of astonishing. The vast majority of addicted soldiers, faced with the immediate prospect of returning to their families and their normal lives, managed to quit heroin almost immediately after leaving Vietnam. The insidious grip of the drug, so powerful in the combat zone, seems to loosen remarkably quickly once the soldiers are removed from that specific, traumatic environment. This outcome forces a reevaluation, a deeper understanding of the nature of addiction itself. It becomes clear that for many of these men, their heroin use was not simply a lifelong habit, a fixed character flaw, or an inescapable disease in the conventional sense. Instead, it was overwhelmingly a coping mechanism, a desperate strategy to navigate the unimaginable stress, fear, boredom, and moral complexities of war trauma. The jungle, the constant threat, the sense of isolation, the blurring of moral lines, these were the true drivers of their addiction. Once removed from that hellish crucible, the immediate need for such a powerful escape dissolved for most. Yet, you sense that this doesn't mean the experience vanished entirely. The physical cravings may have subsided. The active use may have ceased. But the memory of heroin, of the profound, instant oblivion it offered, undoubtedly haunted them. It was a potent phantom, a whisper in the back of their minds, a vivid recollection of a time when pain and fear could simply be turned off. Operation Golden Flow succeeded in preventing a literal tidal wave of addiction, but it could not erase the invisible scars, the psychological imprints that the drugs and the war that necessitated them had left behind. The journey home, for many, was just the beginning of another battle, one fought within themselves against the lingering shadows of a chemically aided survival. Even as Operation Golden Flow celebrated its quiet success in stemming the immediate tide of heroin addiction, you begin to perceive a deeper, more insidious wound festering beneath the surface of the returning veteran's post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Hundreds of thousands of men, who had seemingly left their drug habits behind on the Vietnamese tarmac, found themselves haunted by the war's invisible scars. The conflict might have ended, but its echoes reverberated in their minds, in their nightmares, in their anxious waking hours. You imagine a veteran, perhaps like you, back in the sprawling, indifferent concrete canyons of a major city like New York in 1975. The vibrant, bustling energy of the streets feels alien, detached from the quiet, internal battle he constantly fights. He sits alone on a cold park bench, perhaps in the shadow of towering buildings. The distant murmur of city life, a stark contrast to the ever-present cacophony of his memories. His body trembles, not from cold, but from an internal chill, a relentless anxiety that gnaws at his core. The quiet moments, once sought for peace, become fertile ground for flashbacks, for the resurfacing of horrors that no amount of distance can erase. In this profound and often misunderstood struggle, many veterans, desperate for relief from the relentless torment of their minds, began to self-medicate. The lessons learned in the jungles of Vietnam, the instant escape offered by powerful substances, resurfaced as a tempting, dangerous solution. You envision this man, perhaps, reaching into his pocket, his hand shaking. It might be a small baggie, a familiar white powder within, leading to a relapse into the old, comforting numbness of heroin. Or perhaps, in this new era, it's a bottle of prescription pills, obtained through legitimate means, but used with the same desperate intent to quiet the screams in his head, to calm the frantic pounding of his heart, to dull the sharp edges of his trauma. The syringe in his hand, a silent, almost ritualistic gesture, speaks volumes of a suffering that the public largely failed to comprehend. America, slowly and painfully, began to realize a profound truth. Drugs in warfare were not just wartime tools, temporary crutches for the wounded, or simple indulgences for the bored. They were powerful, lingering ghosts that refused to be confined to the battlefield. They followed the soldiers home, settling into the quiet corners of their lives, manifesting as new addictions, new struggles, the legacy of pain, fear, and self-medication, forged in the crucible of distant wars, became an enduring part of the post-war landscape, a silent testament to the hidden costs of combat, waiting to resurface in the quiet, lonely battles of everyday life. The visible wounds of war healed, but the invisible scars, often medicated with the very substances that had once offered temporary salvation, proved far more intractable. You now stand at the culmination of a vast, almost imperceptible arc of history, stretching back over 150 years. From the bloody, muddy fields of Gettysburg to the chaotic, sun-baked alleys of today's cities, you can trace a continuous, unbroken thread, the pervasive, often tragic, relationship between American soldiers and opioid addiction. It is a legacy woven into the very fabric of our military history, a hidden dimension of conflict that continues to echo in our modern lives. From the Civil War, where morphine birthed soldier's disease among 400,000 veterans, to the brutal trenches of World War I, where cocaine joined morphine to fuel relentless exhaustion, through World War II and the Korean War, which refined the use of syrettes and introduced amphetamines to push soldiers beyond natural limits, and finally, to the stark, undeniable reality of Vietnam, where pure China white heroin claimed 20% of a generation. All these threads, from different eras, different battlefields, and different drugs, converge into a single, profound realization. Soldiers have, time and again, stood on the very front lines of opioid addiction history. They were often the first to experience the drug's potent effects, the first to suffer its consequences, and the first to bring its hidden struggles back home. Their experiences, in many ways, foreshadowed and shaped the understanding of addiction itself. And so, as you stand in the present, you look out upon an America grappling with its modern opioid crisis, a silent, relentless epidemic claiming over 100,000 lives annually. You see the ghosts of Gettysburg, of the trenches, of Vietnam, whispering in the background. The profound human impulse to escape pain, to numb fear, to seek solace in a world that can be overwhelmingly brutal. This impulse has always been there. The drugs change, the battlefields shift, but the core human vulnerability remains. From Gettysburg's bloody, hallowed fields, where morphine first offered its deceptive peace, to the dark alleys and quiet homes of today's cities, where fentanyl and prescription pills cast their long shadows, the whispers of morphine and heroin have never truly faded. They remain, a quiet, mournful hum beneath the surface of our history, a constant reminder of the profound, lasting impact of war, and the enduring human search for relief, even at the highest possible cost. And perhaps, as you reflect on this long, intertwined history, you realize that the battle against addiction is, in many ways, just another war, with its own casualties and its own enduring, invisible scars. Our journey begins not with a specific substance, but with a fundamental understanding of the human condition in the crucible of conflict, how individuals, shaped by their cultures, perceived and reacted to the brutal reality of wounds on the battlefield. Imagine for a moment the chaotic roar of combat, the clash of steel, the acrid scent of gunpowder hanging heavy in the air, or the sharp, metallic tang of blood. In such moments, the body's integrity is often shattered, and the mind must contend with sudden, profound trauma. For many European soldiers, particularly as military medicine slowly, painstakingly evolved through the 19th and early 20th centuries, the expectation was that a severe injury signaled the end of their active participation in the fight. As Winston Churchill himself observed in 1899 during his early military experiences, a debilitating wound typically led to a cessation of hostilities for the afflicted soldier. This wasn't a sign of cowardice. but a deeply ingrained cultural expectation, a belief that survival and subsequent medical treatment, however rudimentary, were the primary objectives once one was grievously harmed. A soldier, struck down by a bullet or shrapnel, would likely fall, perhaps cry out, and then focus all their remaining energy on seeking aid, or simply surviving until aid could reach them. The field hospital, however basic, was a beacon of hope, a place where the fight for life continued, albeit in a different form. The sounds that would echo around such a fallen soldier would shift from the immediate din of battle to the distant cries of comrades, the rumble of artillery further away, and perhaps the desperate, ragged breath of their own failing lungs. The ground beneath them, whether muddy or dusty, would feel cold, hard, and unforgiving against their injured body. Contrast this, if you will, with the accounts from what European powers often termed fanatical fighters, particularly observed in colonial wars across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. These were individuals whose cultural frameworks, religious convictions, and often stark life expectancies profoundly reshaped their relationship with pain and mortality. For them, a wound, even a mortal one, might not signify the end of the fight. Instead, it could become a catalyst for an even fiercer, more unyielding resistance. Stories abound of warriors continuing to advance, to strike blows, even after sustaining injuries that would, by all conventional medical understanding, render a person utterly incapacitated. The very idea of giving up, of submitting to the enemy, or even to the overwhelming pain, was often antithetical to their spiritual or cultural beliefs. The air around them might not just carry the scent of battle, but also the incense of sacred rituals, the chanted prayers, or the ancestral songs that bolstered their resolve. The ground they fought on might be sacred, their ancestors watching. This stark difference in reactions had profound, practical implications, particularly for military strategists and weapon designers. The prevailing European military philosophy struggled to comprehend, let alone counter, this level of sustained, seemingly pain-defying aggression. The standard military small arms, designed to incapacitate an enemy, sometimes seemed insufficient against these unyielding adversaries. This led directly to intense debates over firearm calibers, with the concept of stopping power gaining significant traction. A prime example emerged from the American experience in the Philippines during the early 20th century. Faced with Moro warriors who, fueled by deep religious conviction and a fierce resistance to colonial rule, would often continue fighting even after being shot multiple times with the then standard .38 caliber revolver. American military leadership sought a more decisive weapon. This urgent need for a projectile that could definitively halt a determined, advancing foe led to the adoption of the formidable Colt .45 caliber pistol. The larger, heavier bullet was believed to impart a greater shock to the body, a greater kinetic energy transfer, thus ensuring that even the most fanatically resolved warrior would be brought down immediately. The thud of the .45 round, the crack of its discharge, would have echoed with a certain finality in the dense jungles and rice paddies, a sound meant to instill not just physical incapacitation, but also a psychological deterrent. The very design of weaponry, therefore, became an unwitting testament to the profound influence of culture and the human will on the grim calculus of the battlefield. This initial understanding of differing human responses sets the stage for our deeper dive into the specific substances that further modulated these reactions, offering temporary solace, fleeting courage, or even destructive determination. As we gently transition our focus we arrive at one of the oldest and most ubiquitous substances associated with warfare: alcohol. Its presence on the battlefield, in military camps, and aboard naval vessels stretches back centuries, intertwined with the very fabric of military life. The phrase itself, Dutch courage, a term that has echoed through the corridors of history, carries a faint whisper of its origins in the 17th century Anglo-Dutch Wars. During these intense maritime and land conflicts, Dutch troops earned a reputation, whether entirely fair or not, for imbibing spirits, particularly gin, before charging into the fray. The clinking of bottles, the murmur of toasts, the pungent aroma of juniper from the gin, these would have been common sensory experiences in a Dutch camp before a major engagement. It was believed, by both friend and foe, that this liquid courage provided a temporary bolstering of the spirit, a dulling of fear that allowed men to face the grim realities of battle with a perceived bravado. Indeed, alcohol was a pervasive presence across various armies and navies throughout history, extending far beyond the Anglo-Dutch conflicts. Consider the navies of the world, particularly the British Royal Navy, where the rum ration became an iconic, almost sacred, part of a sailor's daily routine for centuries. Imagine the vast, creaking wooden ships traversing the immense, unforgiving oceans. Life aboard these vessels was harsh, monotonous, and dangerous, often fraught with disease, cramped conditions, and the ever-present threat of storms or enemy engagement. The daily ration of rum, perhaps a half pint or more, diluted with water, served in a wooden tub known as the grog tub, was a moment of profound psychological significance. It was a tangible comfort, a small pleasure in an otherwise austere existence. The rich, sweet scent of rum, mingling with the salt spray and the smell of tar and hemp, would have filled the air as sailors lined up, their hands calloused, their faces weathered, eagerly awaiting their portion. This ritual provided not just a brief, warming sensation, but a moment of camaraderie, a shared experience that bonded men together in their isolated, floating world. Beyond mere comfort, alcohol offered perceived benefits on the battlefield. Foremost among these was a boost to morale. In the face of impending doom, a shared drink could momentarily lift spirits, foster a sense of bravado, and help men steel themselves for the horrors ahead. It was a collective psychological preparation, a way to temporarily shed the natural apprehension that grips any human being facing the prospect of violent death. Additionally, for short periods, it could provide a temporary stamina boost, masking fatigue and dulling minor aches and pains, allowing soldiers to push a little harder, march a little further, or fight with a little more ferocity before exhaustion fully set in. The internal fire it ignited, however fleeting, could translate into an outward surge of energy. However, the downsides of relying on alcohol as a military aid were numerous and often catastrophic. The very qualities that made it appealing, its ability to lower inhibitions and dull perception, also led directly to indiscipline and disorder. Drunken soldiers were more prone to insubordination, brawling, and a general breakdown of military order. The precise, coordinated movements required for effective drills and maneuvers became impossible. A slurred command, a stumbling step, a delayed reaction, any of these could spell disaster in a tightly formed line of battle or during a complex tactical movement. Imagine a unit, supposedly preparing for a precision charge, instead dissolving into a chaotic, staggering mob. Their weapons wielded erratically, their minds clouded by drink. Such a scene would be an officer's nightmare, a clear path to defeat. Furthermore, chronic alcohol use led to significant health problems, reduced overall effectiveness, and long-term addiction. While a single ration might offer a brief lift, sustained heavy drinking would leave soldiers debilitated, their bodies weakened, their judgment impaired. The very substance meant to steel them could ultimately leave them vulnerable, a silent enemy undermining their fighting capability from within. Despite these profound drawbacks, alcohol's pervasive presence in military life, from the raucous taverns frequented by soldiers on leave to the quiet, shared flask in a cold trench, underscores its enduring role as both a coping mechanism and a double-edged sword in the history of warfare. Its legacy is one of temporary comfort and camaraderie, intertwined with the bitter taste of indiscipline and long-term physical and psychological cost. From the steady, comforting, yet often detrimental embrace of alcohol, we now turn our gaze to a much more ancient, primal, and often terrifying use of substances in combat: the suspected use of hallucinogens by the legendary Norse berserkers. Picture the harsh, windswept landscapes of ancient Scandinavia, the longships slicing through icy fjords, the cold, stark beauty of a world where survival often depended on strength and ferocity. It is from this setting that the tales of the berserkers emerge, warriors who, before battle, were said to enter a trance-like fury, fighting with an almost supernatural strength and imperviousness to pain. Their name itself, potentially derived from bear sark, bear shirt, or bear sark, bear shirt, hinted at their wild, animalistic nature, perhaps fighting without armor, consumed by a bestial rage. The air around them would have crackled with an almost tangible tension, their guttural roars echoing across the battleground. While the exact nature of their trance remains a subject of historical debate, many scholars postulate that these warriors may have ingested various hallucinogenic substances to achieve their famed state of ecstatic, uncontrollable aggression. The most commonly cited candidate is the Amanita muscaria mushroom, with its distinctive red cap and white spots, though other plants native to the region might also have been used. Imagine the ritual: the quiet, flickering firelight, the earthy scent of drying herbs, perhaps the low, rhythmic chanting, followed by the consumption of these potent, mind-altering substances. As the effects began to take hold, the world around them would warp, colors might intensify, sounds might become distorted, and the very perception of their own bodies and limits would begin to unravel. Fear, pain, and self-preservation, the natural instincts that restrain most combatants, would be utterly suppressed, replaced by a singular, overwhelming urge to destroy. Their eyes might glow with an unnatural intensity. Their movements become jagged and unpredictable, making them terrifying adversaries. This practice, while perhaps most famously associated with the Norse, was by no means unique to them. Throughout human history, across diverse tribal societies worldwide, similar uses of psychoactive plants and fungi have been documented to induce altered states for warfare or ritualistic combat. From parts of Africa, where indigenous warriors might use local herbs to enhance bravery or spiritual protection, to specific tribes in India and Afghanistan, where certain plants were believed to grant preternatural strength or courage. In the vast, ancient forests of Native America and the lush, dense jungles of South America, shamans and warriors alike would consume various entheogens, substances intended to connect one to the divine, to prepare for battle or to embark on spiritual journeys that intertwined with their martial prowess. The sounds of their rituals, the smells of their burning herbs, the vivid visions they experienced, these formed a sensory tapestry that underpinned their warrior ethos. The effectiveness of such hallucinogen-induced fury in a small-scale tribal skirmish is undeniable. It could create a psychologically terrifying enemy, capable of extreme, sustained violence, inspiring what appeared to be fanatical determination against an unorganized or technologically inferior foe. A handful of such unyielding warriors could wreak havoc, sowing panic and fear. However, this very quality, the unpredictable, uncontrollable nature of the trance, made such practices wholly unsuitable for large, organized militaries. Modern armies, from the Roman legions to the disciplined formations of 18th century Europe and beyond, rely on strict discipline, precise coordination, and the ability of individual soldiers to follow complex commands under pressure. A soldier consumed by a drug-induced rage, incapable of distinguishing friend from foe, unable to respond to a bugle call or a shouted order, would be more of a liability than an asset. The inherent chaos of hallucinogenic use fundamentally clashes with the structured order required for mass combat. Thus, while the whisper of the berserker's fury persists through legend, a chilling reminder of humanity's primal capacity for violence, the disciplined armies of the world largely turned away from such extreme measures. They sought courage and endurance through other means, often through the less dramatic, yet perhaps equally insidious, pathways of more common stimulants and pain relievers, which would come to define the chemical landscape of warfare in later centuries. The memory of the berserkers, however, serves as a powerful testament to humanity's ancient quest to transcend the limits of fear and pain, even if it meant venturing into the darkest corners of the mind. As the industrial age dawned and medical science slowly began to unravel the complex chemistry of the human body, new substances entered the stage of warfare, their roles often evolving dramatically over short periods. One such substance was cocaine, which enjoyed a surprisingly broad and socially acceptable presence in Victorian society, a stark contrast to its later criminalized status. Imagine the elegant drawing rooms, the bustling city streets, the quiet studies of late 19th century England and America. In these settings, cocaine was often marketed openly, even prescribed, as a tonic, a remedy for various ailments, from fatigue to toothaches. Its invigorating properties were seen as beneficial for mental clarity and energy. Indeed, the iconic detective Sherlock Holmes, a figure of keen intellect and logical deduction, was famously depicted injecting cocaine in Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, reflecting the drug's then accepted, if sometimes controversial, status among the intelligentsia and upper classes. The subtle scent of a medicinal tincture or the quiet rustle of a prescription bottle would have been part of the urban soundscape. When the Great War, World War I, erupted in 1914, plunging Europe into an unimaginable maelstrom of industrialized conflict, cocaine, perhaps predictably, found its way to the front lines. Soldiers, enduring unimaginable stress, fatigue, and the constant threat of death in the muddy, desolate trenches, sought anything that could offer even a temporary reprieve. Cocaine, often in the form of pills marketed under names like Forced March, became a discreet, yet widely used, aid. Imagine the biting cold of the winter trench, the incessant drone of artillery shells, the lingering smell of decay and damp earth. A soldier, shivering and exhausted, might discreetly pop a pill, hoping for the promised surge of energy, a sharpening of their senses, a momentary escape from the crushing weight of fear and weariness. The promise of being able to march further, stay awake longer, and maintain vigilance in the face of overwhelming odds was a powerful draw. The small white tablets offered a fleeting illusion of control over their deteriorating physical and mental states. However, the war, in its relentless brutality, also served as a harsh accelerator of social and medical understanding. By 1916, just 2 years into the devastating conflict, the official view of cocaine began to shift dramatically. The initial optimism surrounding its perceived benefits gave way to a growing awareness of its profound negative consequences. The insidious grip of addiction, the psychological dependency, and the long-term health detriments became increasingly undeniable. Soldiers who had initially found a temporary boost were now suffering from severe withdrawal symptoms, psychosis, and a shattered ability to function without the drug. The subtle tremors in their hands, the vacant look in their eyes, the desperate search for their next dose, these visible signs painted a stark picture of the drug's destructive power. Consequently, official military use and medical endorsement of cocaine began to decline sharply. Governments and medical authorities, now fully confronting the widespread problems, started to implement stricter regulations and outright prohibitions. Yet, even as official channels closed, the unofficial flow of cocaine continued, a testament to the desperate need and ingrained habits of men trapped in the hell of the trenches. It became a black market commodity, traded quietly in the dark corners of the camps, smuggled in from home, a shadow economy driven by raw human need. The hushed whispers of illicit transactions, the furtive glances, the shared secret of a hidden stash, these would have been part of the hidden soundtrack of the front. This period also marked a broader societal transition, one that saw rising restrictions on other substances. Most notably, the burgeoning temperance movement and the eventual implementation of alcohol prohibition in several nations, including the United States. The era of casual drug use was drawing to a close, at least in the public sphere. The horrors of the Great War exposed the vulnerabilities of both individuals and societies, leading to a re-evaluation of what was considered acceptable, what was beneficial, and what was ultimately detrimental to the health and performance of a nation's fighting force. The cocaine chronicles of World War I, therefore, stand as a poignant example of how a substance can transition from a social comfort to a wartime expedient, and finally, to a recognized societal hazard, forever changing its place in the human story. Our historical narrative now speeds forward, quite literally, to the era of amphetamines, a class of synthetic stimulants that would profoundly reshape the pace and nature of modern warfare, particularly during World War II. While the true pharmaceutical potential of these compounds began to be explored in the late stages of World War I, it was in the crucible of the Second World War that their use became truly extensive and strategically significant. As early as late 1918, German scientists, recognizing the limitations of cocaine and the urgent need for sustained soldier endurance, began experimenting with combinations of stimulants, including early forms of methamphetamine. Their goal was to create a substance that could enable soldiers to push beyond the limits of human fatigue, allowing for forced marches that covered incredible distances. Some reports speak of German units capable of advancing up to 90 miles in a single day, an astonishing feat for infantry. Imagine the relentless, rhythmic crunch of thousands of boots on the ground, the hushed breathing of men pushing their bodies to the absolute brink, their minds fueled by an artificial energy that kept sleep and exhaustion at bay. The air would be filled with the sound of their labored breaths, the creak of their gear, and an unnatural, persistent silence from the lack of complaints. However, it was during World War II, under the command of Nazi Germany, that amphetamines, specifically methamphetamine marketed as Pervitin, reached an unprecedented scale of distribution and strategic integration. The concept of the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, relied heavily on rapid, relentless armored thrusts, designed to bypass enemy defenses and plunge deep into their territory, causing disorganization and panic. To maintain this terrifying pace, the human element, the tank crews, the truck drivers, the infantry following close behind had to match the machines. And Pervitin became the chemical engine for these super soldiers. Millions of tablets were distributed to German troops, enabling them to advance for 72 hours or more with minimal sleep, little food, and a heightened state of alert. The buzzing energy, the focused intensity, the suppression of hunger and fatigue. These were the immediate effects that fueled the early, devastating successes of the German war machine. The roar of tank engines, the screech of treads, the distant crackle of rifle fire, all accompanied by the internal tremor of a body pushed beyond its natural limits. This was, in many ways, the chilling real-world inspiration for the archetypal Captain America, a soldier artificially enhanced to perform beyond human capabilities. While Nazi Germany was the most extensive and systematic user of amphetamines, other major armies, including the British and American forces, also utilized stimulants, though generally on a more limited or targeted basis. British bomber crews, for instance, might be given wakey-wakey pills for long, grueling night missions over enemy territory. The distant drone of their aircraft, a constant testament to their sustained vigil. American troops, too, had access to various forms of PEP pills to combat fatigue during extended operations. However, the sheer scale and strategic intent behind Germany's widespread Pervitin use were unparalleled. The shadow of drug use even extended to the very top of the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler himself. Throughout the later years of the war, became a heavy and dependent drug user, relying on a cocktail of substances administered by his personal physician under Theodore Morell. This included not just amphetamines, but also opiates and other compounds, purportedly to combat various ailments and to maintain his increasingly erratic energy levels. The sounds of syringes being prepared, the hushed conversations with his doctor, the artificial bursts of lucidity followed by periods of withdrawn lassitude, these would have been part of the chilling reality behind the closed doors of the Führer bunker. The image of a leader, once seemingly invincible, increasingly sustained by a chemical dependency, adds another layer of complexity to the understanding of the war's desperate final years. The legacy of amphetamines in WWII is a dual one, a demonstration of their profound capacity to enhance endurance and focus, but also a stark warning about the human cost. The initial burst of superhuman energy inevitably gave way to crushing exhaustion, psychological crashes, and debilitating addiction. The chemical speed of the Blitzkrieg was achieved at a profound expense to the individual soldiers, leaving many with long-term physical and mental scars. A silent and enduring consequence of the war's relentless pace. The echoes of those forced marches and sleepless nights continue to resonate. A testament to humanity's ongoing struggle with the ethical boundaries of enhancing performance in the grim theater of war. Our historical exploration now takes a detour into a realm where fact intertwines with powerful, enduring myth, the story of hashish and the enigmatic medieval order whose name it allegedly bestowed upon the English language, the assassins. The term hashishin itself, from which our word assassin is derived, stems from Arabic, often linked to the consumption of powdered hemp leaves, or hashish. Imagine the sun-baked landscapes of the Middle East in the 11th and 12th centuries. The scent of spices and dust carried on the wind, the low murmur of market activity, and the distant, fortified strongholds nestled high in the mountains of Persia and Syria. These were the domains of the Nizari Ismailis, a Shia Muslim sect led by charismatic figures like Hassani Saba, often referred to as the Old Man of the Mountain. Banto Sa Saum. The legend, largely propagated by Marco Polo and other European chroniclers who encountered these fiercely independent and unorthodox communities, paints a vivid, albeit highly sensationalized, picture. It claimed that the Nizari leaders would drug their young devotees with hashish, leading them into a fabricated paradise filled with beautiful maidens and abundant delights. Upon awakening from their drugged stupor, the followers would be convinced they had glimpsed a divine paradise, which they could only re-enter by carrying out a suicidal mission for their leader. This potent promise, combined with the mind-altering effects of the drug, was supposedly what instilled in them a fearless, almost ecstatic, willingness to undertake daring, often fatal, political assassinations against powerful adversaries, earning them their fearsome reputation, the hushed whispers of their name, the sudden, silent blade in the night. These were the tools of their terror. However, the historical debate surrounding the actual role and extent of hashish use by the Nizari Ismailis is robust and complex. Modern scholarship largely suggests that the extent of drug use, particularly as a direct tool for inducing suicidal courage, was heavily exaggerated, largely by their enemies and by awestruck, often prejudiced, European observers. While it is plausible that some members might have used hashish, either recreationally or for spiritual purposes, the idea that it was systematically used to create brainwashed, fearless killers is considered highly unlikely. The Nizari themselves were not simple drug addicts. They were a sophisticated, highly organized religious and political movement, with a strong internal discipline and a clear ideological framework. Their willingness to sacrifice stemmed more likely from profound religious conviction, unwavering loyalty to their imam, and a shrewd understanding of asymmetrical warfare, rather than from a chemically induced delusion. The power of faith, the strength of conviction, the bonds of brotherhood, these were far more potent motivators than any drug. Nevertheless, the legend of the hashish-fueled assassin gained incredible traction in the medieval imagination and persists to this day. It served to demonize and sensationalize an enemy that was difficult to comprehend, transforming rational, albeit extreme, political acts into the outcome of drugged fanaticism. The story provided a convenient, exotic explanation for the terrifying effectiveness of these medieval killer orders. It allowed the European mind to dismiss their resilience and skill as something other than human, attributing it to the dark arts of drugs rather than the strength of their belief. Ultimately, the tale of the Hashishin and their alleged connection to hashish stands as a powerful testament not to the direct military utility of hallucinogens, but to the enduring human fascination with and fear of altered states of consciousness, especially when intertwined with acts of extreme violence. It highlights how the perceived influence of drugs can shape narrative, create myth, and influence the very language we use, even when the historical reality remains more nuanced and grounded in the complex tapestry of human motivation. The echoes of this exaggerated legend still resonate, a reminder of the blurred lines between historical fact and captivating, if misleading, folklore. From the realm of myth and primal fury, we now descend into the stark, often heartbreaking reality of pain on the battlefield, and the substances that offered both immense relief and profound, lasting consequences: opiates. The 19th century, a period of immense social and scientific upheaval, saw the widespread use of opium in various forms, not just as a recreational drug, but as a primary medical remedy. The sweet, heavy scent of opium dens, the hushed whispers of their patrons, were part of the hidden undercurrents of the age. Its derivatives, like morphine, became revolutionary tools for managing severe pain. This newfound medical power was put to its most harrowing test during the American Civil War, a conflict of unprecedented brutality and scale. Imagine the makeshift field hospitals, often mere tents or barns, overflowing with the wounded. The air thick with the metallic smell of blood, the acrid scent of cautery, and the desperate cries of men whose bodies had been torn apart by rifle balls and cannon shot. In this horrific environment, where amputations were common and sterilization was still an emerging concept, morphine became an indispensable, almost miraculous, agent of relief. Administered directly by injection, it could quiet the screaming pain, allowing surgeons to operate and offering the dying a measure of peace. The sharp prick of the needle, the immediate wave of warmth and calm washing over a racked body. These were moments of fleeting mercy in a world of torment. The demand was so immense that countless pounds of morphine were distributed, and soldiers on both sides became intimately familiar with its numbing embrace. As the world lurched into the 20th century, and the cataclysm of World War I erupted, morphine's role as the standard battlefield pain reliever was cemented. The scale of the carnage in the trenches dwarfed anything seen before. Millions of young men were subjected to wounds of unimaginable severity, shattered limbs, gaping shrapnel wounds, and the agonizing internal injuries caused by explosive force. Morphine, often provided in pre-filled syringes, became a standard part of every medic's kit, a first-line defense against the torment of the battlefield. The sight of a medic administering a shot of morphine would have been a beacon of hope for a wounded soldier, a promise of a temporary oblivion from suffering. The quiet sigh of relief, the gradual slackening of tense muscles, the fading of pain into a hazy comfort, these were the immediate blessings it conferred. However, the widespread, often indiscriminate, use of morphine during both the Civil War and World War I led to a devastating and pervasive problem in the post-war years: widespread addiction. Soldiers who had been treated with morphine for their wounds, often for weeks or months during their recovery, returned home physically scarred, but also chemically dependent. This tragic consequence became so common that opiate addiction was frequently referred to as soldier's disease. Imagine a young man, perhaps barely out of his teens, who had survived the inferno of battle, only to find himself trapped in a different kind of war, a relentless internal struggle against a craving he could not control. The trembling hands, the desperate search for a dose, the agonizing withdrawal symptoms when it was unavailable. These were the unseen wounds that many veterans carried home. The stigma, the lack of understanding, the sheer scale of the problem it created, a silent epidemic, touching countless lives. The bittersweet legacy of opiates in warfare is a powerful reminder of the double-edged nature of medical progress. They offered indispensable comfort and relief in moments of extreme agony, allowing for life-saving surgeries and mitigating unimaginable suffering. Yet, they also left an enduring shadow of addiction, a quiet and insidious war fought by individuals long after the cannons fell silent. The sounds of veterans coughing, their bodies aching, their minds haunted by the twin specters of war and addiction, became an unspoken part of the post-war landscape. The story of morphine in war is a poignant one, reflecting humanity's relentless pursuit of alleviating pain. Even when the path to relief leads, unexpectedly to another form of profound suffering. As our gentle historical journey approaches its conclusion, we turn our attention to the less dramatic, yet immensely pervasive and enduring stimulants that have accompanied soldiers throughout much of modern history: tobacco and caffeine. Unlike the more potent, mind-altering substances we've discussed, these two compounds have held a long-lasting, relatively mild, and universally accepted place in military life, offering stimulation and comfort without the heavy drawbacks of narcotics or hallucinogens. The distinctive scent of tobacco smoke, whether from a pipe, a hand-rolled cigarette, or a factory-made pack, is almost synonymous with the image of a soldier taking a brief, quiet respite. The rich aroma of brewing coffee, or the comforting, earthy scent of tea, would have been equally familiar. Tobacco, in particular, has been a constant companion for soldiers for centuries. From the chewable plugs carried by American Civil War soldiers to the ubiquitous cigarette rations issued to troops in both world wars, its presence was nearly universal. Imagine a soldier in a muddy trench under a vast, indifferent sky, the constant tension gnawing at his nerves. A shared cigarette, perhaps lit with a sputtering match against the wind, offered a moment of profound psychological solace. The soft exhalation of smoke, the brief lull in conversation as each man drew on his cigarette, the quiet comfort of the nicotine buzz, these were small, vital acts of rebellion against the chaos and fear. It was a shared ritual, fostering camaraderie, a common bond among men facing extraordinary circumstances. The gentle crackle of the paper, the quiet murmur of conversation, the shared silence, these were moments of peace. It offered a distraction, a brief escape, and a slight energy lift, without inducing the profound disorientation or addiction of stronger substances. Caffeine, primarily consumed through coffee or tea, played an equally crucial, if less romanticized, role. Its mild stimulant properties increasing alertness, reducing the perception of fatigue, and improving focus were invaluable. In the chill of a pre-dawn patrol, or during a long, monotonous guard duty, a hot cup of coffee could be a lifesaver, warming the body and sharpening the mind. The clinking of metal cups, the comforting steam rising into the cold air, the bitter yet invigorating taste of the brew, these sensations offered a small anchor of normalcy in often abnormal situations. It was a practical tool for maintaining vigilance and performance, particularly during extended operations or in conditions of sleep deprivation. For troops enduring the biting cold of winter campaigns, or the humid heat of tropical deployments, a hot drink could offer both physical comfort and a psychological boost. The quiet sips, the shared warmth, the momentary sense of being connected to something familiar, these small details often made a significant difference. Crucially, compared to the more potent narcotics or synthetic stimulants, tobacco and caffeine offered their benefits with relatively mild, often socially acceptable, drawbacks. While addiction to both is certainly real, the acute incapacitation, severe withdrawal syndromes, or profound psychological disturbances associated with substances like cocaine, amphetamines, or strong opiates were largely absent. They allowed soldiers to remain functional, disciplined, and capable of performing their duties, while still providing a much-needed temporary lift or moment of respite. Their pervasive use speaks to their practical utility and their unique ability to offer comfort and a subtle edge without fundamentally compromising military effectiveness. In the vast chemical landscape of warfare, tobacco and caffeine stand as steadfast, almost humble, companions. They represent the everyday struggle for endurance and comfort, a testament to the enduring human need for small, manageable escapes and subtle boosts in the face of overwhelming stress. Their quiet presence, woven into the fabric of military life for generations, underscores the broad spectrum of substances that have shaped and continue to shape the experience of conflict, from the grand strategic to the most personal, individual level. The lingering scent of wood smoke mingled with tobacco, and the warm steam of a shared cup of coffee are sensory echoes of countless quiet moments of resilience on battlefields long since quieted. As our tranquil historical journey concludes, we gather the threads of our exploration, revealing a complex tapestry where substances have played a multifaceted, often contradictory, role in the history of warfare. From the primal rituals of ancient warriors to the sophisticated chemistry of modern conflict, drugs have consistently offered both profound advantages and significant, often devastating, disadvantages. The silent wisdom gleaned from centuries of human struggle whispers to us the enduring truth that the pursuit of an edge, a solace, or a temporary escape often comes with a hidden cost. On the one hand, the advantages offered by these substances were undeniable and, in certain contexts, even strategically vital. They could provide a significant boost to morale, transforming fear into a fleeting sense of bravado and dulling the crushing psychological weight of impending battle. Imagine the shared communal experience of a rum ration on a rolling deck, or the quiet solace of a shared cigarette in a freezing trench. These were small, yet powerful, acts of psychological fortification. Furthermore, many substances offered a temporary surge in stamina and endurance, allowing soldiers to push their bodies beyond natural limits, enabling forced marches, sleepless vigils, and relentless advances that profoundly influenced the pace and outcome of campaigns. The ability to suppress hunger and fatigue, to remain alert for days on end, created an almost superhuman veneer. And perhaps most critically, for the wounded, substances like opiates provided invaluable pain relief, offering a merciful respite from unimaginable suffering and allowing for vital medical interventions that saved countless lives. The quiet relief, the fading of agony, was a profound gift in a world defined by brutal pain. Yet, this chemical assistance came with a heavy, often unseen, price. The disadvantages were equally profound and far-reaching. The most insidious of these was addiction, a silent epidemic that swept through armies and societies in the wake of major conflicts. Soldiers, once reliant on substances for pain relief or energy, found themselves trapped in a cruel dependency that often outlasted their physical wounds, leaving them with a lifelong struggle that earned the grim moniker soldier's disease. Beyond individual suffering, these substances often led to severe indiscipline and disorder within military ranks. A drugged soldier, whether from alcohol-fueled bravado or a cocaine-induced frenzy, could be unpredictable, disobedient, and a liability to the highly coordinated movements of an organized military force. The breakdown of command, the inability to follow orders, these could be catastrophic. And finally, the long-term physical and psychological harm inflicted by chronic drug use often lingered long after the last shot was fired, leaving veterans with shattered health, mental health crises, and profoundly altered lives. Thus, from the ritualistic consumption of hallucinogens by the ancient berserkers to the systematic distribution of methamphetamine to Nazi troops, and from the pervasive presence of rum on naval vessels to the widespread use of morphine for the wounded, drugs have undeniably shaped the endurance, the behavior, and even the mythos of warriors across the ages. They have influenced not only individual capacity, but also, in subtle and profound ways, the very outcomes of warfare. The victory or defeat of an army was not solely determined by the caliber of their weapons, the brilliance of their tactics, or the strength of their numbers. It was also, in part, influenced by what soldiers consumed, the fleeting courage they found in a drink, the manufactured alertness from a pill, or the blessed oblivion from pain. As we gently bring our journey to a close, let us reflect on this complex interplay. The history of drugs in war is a story of human ingenuity in the face of immense pressure, of the constant search for solace and an edge, but also a poignant reminder of the enduring fragility and resilience of the human spirit. It is a quiet echo of countless individual experiences, a testament to the profound ways in which even the smallest, most personal choices can ripple outward, shaping the grand narrative of history. May your rest be peaceful and your thoughts be calm.